The attic of number 7, Clover Lane, smelled of old books, dusty curtains, and something else, something warm and faintly sweet, like cinnamon toast on a cold morning. 10-year-old Ellie Marsh had only been sent up there to find her grandmother's old sewing box. She wasn't supposed to stay. She wasn't supposed to poke around. And she was absolutely, definitely not supposed to tip over the tall stack of cardboard boxes in the far corner. But she did. The boxes crashed to the floor with a sound like thunder, sending up a storm of dust that made Ellie sneeze 7 times in a row. When the cloud finally settled and she wiped her watering eyes, she saw it. Tucked behind where the boxes had stood, nestled in a little hollow in the wooden wall, sat an egg. Not a chicken egg. Not an Easter egg made of chocolate. This egg was the size of a rugby ball, covered in overlapping scales the color of burnt orange and deep copper, and it was glowing. A soft, pulsing light, like a tiny heartbeat, throbbed from somewhere deep inside it. Warm. Alive. Ellie's own heart hammered in her chest. She crept closer, one slow step at a time, until she was close enough to feel the warmth radiating off the shell. She reached out a single finger and touched it. The egg shivered. Then, crack. A tiny claw punched through the shell. Then another claw. Then a triangular, scaly snout. Then 2 enormous amber eyes, blinking in the dusty attic light, stared directly at Ellie. Fire. The creature that climbed out of the broken shell was no bigger than a kitten. It had 4 stubby legs, a wriggling tail with a tuft of flame at the tip, 2 crinkled little wings folded against its back, and ears like tiny holly leaves. It shook the shell fragments off its body, stretched its wings, sat down, and burped a perfect ring of orange smoke. Ellie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. The creature blinked at her. Then, very slowly, it stretched its neck forward, sniffed a finger, and licked it with a tiny forked tongue. It felt like the tip of a warm candle flame, but it didn't burn. It tickled. "Hello," Ellie whispered. "Are you a dragon?" The creature puffed up its tiny chest, spread its crinkled wings as wide as they would go, which was about the width of Ellie's school lunchbox, and let out a sound that was half roar, half squeak. "Rah-fut." Ellie laughed again, and this time the dragon seemed pleased. It waddled forward and climbed straight up her arm to sit on her shoulder, curling its tail around her neck like a warm scarf. Ellie named him Ember that same afternoon. Ellie lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a smile stretching so wide across her face that her cheeks ached. She had a dragon. A real, living, fire-breathing, hair-clip-stealing dragon. Life, she decided, was officially perfect. She had absolutely no idea how very complicated things were about to become. Ember grew fast. Within 2 weeks, he was the size of a Labrador puppy. He had figured out how to land on things without knocking them over, mostly, had stopped singling Ellie's eyebrows, mostly, and had developed a deep, passionate love for 3 things: toasted marshmallows, adventure films, and, most surprisingly of all, books. It started with picture books. He would nose them off the shelf, flip them open with a claw, and stare at the pages with intense, amber eyes. Then one Tuesday evening, Ellie came home from school to find him sitting on her desk, a chapter book propped open before him, turning pages with a careful claw. He looked up when she entered, let out a happy little trill of fire, and pointed at the page with one curved talon. "This story," he said, in a voice like crackling embers and rumbling thunder, surprisingly deep for such a small creature, "is very good. The knight is being very silly. The princess could clearly rescue herself." Ellie dropped her school bag on the floor with a thud. "You can talk." "Of course," said Ember, sounding slightly offended. "I have been talking for 4 days. You have been talking back. I assumed you knew." Ellie sat down on the edge of her bed, feeling faintly dizzy. "I thought you were just making noises." "Dragons," said Ember firmly, "do not just make noises. We are extremely eloquent." He paused, then sneezed a small fireball. "Also, what is homework?" "I found a big pile of it in your bag. It looks fascinating." And that was how everything began. The homework problem had been building for weeks. It wasn't that Ellie was stupid. Far from it. She loved stories and art and could name every single constellation in the night sky. But maths made her head feel like it was stuffed with wet cotton wool, and science reports made her fingers go cold and stiff above the keyboard. And this term, with Ember needing feeding, playing, and generally looking after, The homework pile had grown from a small hill into a small mountain. "I have 17 things due on Friday," Ellie said one Tuesday evening, staring at her planner with the expression of someone staring into a very deep hole. Fractions, a report about volcanoes, 10 spelling sentences, and a timeline of ancient Egypt. Ember, who was sitting on the desk twirling a pencil between his claws, looked up with bright, excited eyes. "Volcanoes," he said, with the enthusiasm of someone who considers volcanoes a personal interest. "Oh, I know everything about volcanoes. Magma composition, eruption patterns, the beautiful way pyroclastic flows move. I could write 10 pages on volcanoes. Also, fractions are delightful. You simply think of the numerator as the number of marshmallows you have eaten, and the denominator as the total marshmallows. It becomes very motivating." Ellie stared at him. "How do you know about volcanoes and fractions?" "I have read 47 of your books," Ember said, without any particular embarrassment. "Also the encyclopedia. Also the dictionary. Also the back of several cereal boxes, which was surprisingly informative." Fire. There was a long pause. Outside, rain began to tap gently against Ellie's window. The warm glow of Ember's tail tip lit the desk with a soft, amber light. Ellie looked at the mountain of homework. She looked at Ember. She looked at the homework again. "Ember," she said slowly, could you maybe, help me with this?" "Could I?" Ember leapt to his feet, sending 3 pencils flying. His wings spread wide and his amber eyes blazed with excitement. "Sit down. Sharpen a pencil. We are going to learn." But that isn't quite what happened. Ellie had meant for Ember to explain things to her. To be her tutor, perhaps. To sit beside her and help her understand fractions by talking about marshmallows. Instead, the moment she turned away to get a glass of water, she returned to find Ember hunched over her worksheet with a pencil gripped in one careful claw, tongue peeking out in concentration, solving every fraction problem with neat, precise numbers. "Ember, I was supposed to do those." "You were getting water," said Ember reasonably. "They were just sitting there. I was helping." "That's not helping, that's doing it for me." Ember put down the pencil and tilted his head. His amber eyes were very earnest and very confused. "But the outcome is the same. The homework is done. You can relax. I have also started on the volcano report. Did you know that Mount Etna has been erupting continuously for about 3,500 years? It is truly magnificent." Ellie opened her mouth. Then she looked at the fraction worksheet, every problem solved correctly, in handwriting that, squinting, looked enough like her own. She looked at the clock. 7:43 p.m. Her mum would call her for dinner in 12 minutes. She had 17 things due Friday. Warning sign hash. She closed her mouth. She sat down. She let Ember finish the volcano report. And deep in her chest, somewhere under the warm feeling of relief, something small and uncomfortable wriggled, like a tiny worm of worry. But it was easy to ignore. For now. Over the next few weeks, the arrangement grew. It wasn't planned, exactly. It just happened. Ellie would come home, dump her bag, and Ember would be so eager, so delighted by the problems. Oh, long division. Excellent. And look, a comprehension about medieval castles. I have opinions about medieval castles. That it felt almost mean to stop him. He would do the worksheets and Ellie would copy them out in her own handwriting. She told herself this was fine. She told herself she was at least reading the questions when she copied the answers. She told herself that next week, she'd definitely start doing it herself. She told herself a lot of things. Meanwhile, her homework grades had never been better. Her teacher, Mr. Finch, a thin, thoughtful man with round glasses and the habit of tilting his head like a curious bird when something surprised him, began returning Ellie's work with gold stars and comments like excellent analysis and wonderful depth of thinking, Ellie. Ellie smiled and said thank you. Ember, hearing about it later, puffed smoke rings of pride. Gold stars. I shall collect them. Put them on the wall above my sleeping lamp. They're MY gold stars, Ellie said, and immediately felt a hot flush of shame that she quickly pushed away. They weren't her gold stars. Not really. But they were on her worksheets. And that, she told herself, was close enough. It wasn't. For exactly 23 days, everything was wonderful. Ellie's homework folder bulged with gold stars and perfect scores. Her mum smiled at parents' evening and said she was so proud. Her friend Priya, who sat next to her in class and had always been the best at maths, started asking Ellie for help on fraction worksheets, and Ellie had to mumble vague things about just thinking of marshmallows because she genuinely had no idea how to explain the method Ember used. The only difficult part was carrying the secret. It sat in her stomach like a swallowed stone, that secret. Every time Mr. Finch said something encouraging, "I can really see your thinking developing, Ellie," the stone got a little heavier. Every gold star made the worm of worry wriggle a little harder. But she kept pushing it all down, covering it over with the comfortable warm blanket of not thinking about it. Sparkles. At home, Ember was thriving. He had grown to the size of a large dog and was spending his days reading every book in the house. He finished the entire set of encyclopedias on a rainy Saturday and had begun writing what he called his Observations on Human Education, which was a notebook filled with tiny, claw-scratched writing and the occasional small scorch mark from overexcited punctuation. He was happy. That was the thing that made everything harder. Ember loved doing homework. It was the best part of his day. He would pace around the bedroom waiting for Ellie to come home from school, practically vibrating with excitement. "What is tonight's homework?" "Please say there's a history essay." "I have developed 17 fascinating theories about the Roman Empire." "Please say there's a science investigation." "I would like to theorize about density." Please say there's a maths challenge." "Ember," Ellie said one evening, dropping into her chair with a sigh, "there's a big project. The science fair." Ember went absolutely still. His tail stopped swishing. His ears pricked forward. His amber eyes went wide and luminous as two small suns. "The science fair," he breathed. He sounded the way most people sound when they hear they've won a prize. "With a hypothesis and an experiment and data." "Yes, with all that." "And a display board." "A big one. It's due in 3 weeks. It's worth lots of marks." Ember made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a roar. He snatched up a pencil. He opened a fresh notebook. He announced grandly, "have an excellent idea for an experiment. We shall investigate the effect of different soils on plant growth. No, wait, the aerodynamics of different wing shapes. No, oh, what about the conduction of heat through different metals? Ellie, I need graph paper. How many markers do you have?" And Ellie, watching him practically glow with excitement, thought, what's the harm? It's just one more project. The science fair project that Ember designed was brilliant. It really was. He chose to investigate how the color of a surface affects how much heat it absorbs. A clean, elegant experiment, easy to set up, with clear results. He wrote the hypothesis in clear, logical sentences. He designed the experiment carefully, with a control group and 3 variables. He even drew the display board in neat diagrams with colored pencils, and his drawings, Ellie noted with a strange pang, were actually better than hers. She set up the actual experiment. That part was hers, placing the squares of colored card in the sunshine, measuring the temperature every 10 minutes with a thermometer. Her hands. Her timing. She was there for that. But the writing, the analysis, the conclusion, all Ember. The morning she carried the display board into school, rolled up carefully in a cardboard tube, 3 separate classmates stopped in the corridor to say, "Wow, Ellie, is that yours? It looks amazing." And Ellie said, "Yes," and smiled, and the stone in her stomach was now so heavy she wondered if she might just sink straight through the floor. Warning sign hash. Mr. Finch spent a long time looking at Ellie's board at the display setup on Wednesday morning. He read the hypothesis. He examined the data table. He studied the graph, a neat, professional-looking bar graph in 3 colors. He tilted his head in that thoughtful, bird-like way. "This is exceptional work, Ellie," he said. And then he said the words that changed everything. "I'd love for you to present it to the class on Friday. You can explain your experiment and answer questions. It'll be wonderful practice for the regional science fair next month. I think this project could actually win." He smiled at her, warm and proud. Ellie smiled back. And the stone in her stomach turned to ice. Friday arrived the way Ellie had been dreading it would, too quickly, and in full bright sunshine, as if the world had no idea it was supposed to feel catastrophic. She had spent 3 nights trying to memorize Ember's work. She'd read the display board so many times she'd started dreaming about heat conduction. Ember, for his part, had been a wonderful coach, patient, enthusiastic, explaining each section in different ways until Ellie could recite the method and results from memory. But there was a problem. "Ember," she'd said on Thursday night, her voice very small, "I don't actually understand why the dark surfaces got hotter. I know that they did. But I can't explain the science behind it. Not in my own words. Because I didn't figure it out." There was a silence. Ember looked at her. His amber eyes, usually so bright and dancing with enthusiasm, were very still and very serious. "I know what the answer is. I've read it 15 times. But I don't understand it. Not the way I'd understand it if I'd figured it out myself." Another silence, longer this time. Ember curled his tail around himself slowly, like a creature getting smaller. "Sparkles. I see," he said quietly. It was the quietest Ellie had ever heard him, and somehow that was worse than anything. She got through the beginning of the presentation well enough. She stood at the front of the classroom with her display board, which looked magnificent, and explained the experiment. Her voice only shook a little. She got through the hypothesis, the method, the results. She could feel Mr. Finch's encouraging nod from the back of the room. Then Priya put up her hand. Priya was not unkind. She was Ellie's friend. She was also very, very good at science, and she had a genuine question. "Your conclusion says dark surfaces absorb more radiation. But can you explain why? Like, what's actually happening with the light particles?" Ellie opened her mouth, and her mind went completely, absolutely, terrifyingly blank. She knew the words. She'd read them 15 times. Dark surfaces have lower reflectivity and absorb more electromagnetic radiation, converting it to thermal energy. She had those words memorized. But standing here, with Priya's curious face and Mr. Finch's tilted head and 28 pairs of eyes all waiting, the words dissolved like smoke. Because she didn't know it. Not really. Not the way you know something you've genuinely wrestled with and puzzled out yourself. She knew it the way you know a phone number you've been told, and then forgotten the moment you needed it. She said. "It's because the dark color absorbs more." She trailed off. Her face felt like it was on fire. In her head, she could hear Ember's voice, clear and precise, explaining it beautifully. But the explanation wasn't hers. It had never been hers. Warning sign hash. Mr. Finch waited, patient and kind, for 10 long seconds. Then he said, very gently, "Take your time, Ellie." And that gentleness was somehow the worst thing of all, because she didn't deserve it. She hadn't earned it. She hadn't done anything. "I'm sorry," Ellie said, in a very small voice. "I'm not sure I can explain it." Mr. Finch nodded slowly. He tilted his head. His expression wasn't angry. It was something more complicated than that. Something thoughtful and careful. "That's all right for now," he said. "Well done for presenting. Please come and see me at break time." The break time conversation with Mr. Finch was not what Ellie expected. She'd expected to be accused of cheating. She'd expected disappointment and crossed arms and a letter home to her parents. Instead, Mr. Finch poured her a cup of water from his desk thermos, sat down, and said very quietly, "Ellie, whose work is this?" The question hit her like a splash of cold water. She stared at the display board, leaning against the wall. It really was beautiful. The diagrams, the data table, the clean, confident conclusion. She took a very shaky breath. "Not mine," she said. "Sir, I'm sorry. It's not mine." And then, to her absolute horror, she burst into tears. They were big, ugly, relieved, frightened tears, the kind that had apparently been building for 3 weeks and had finally found a door left open. Mr. Finch didn't look shocked. He handed her a tissue and waited. When she finally stopped sniffling enough to speak, he said, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Ellie looked at her hands. She couldn't very well tell him about Ember. Instead, she said something that was completely true, even if it didn't explain the whole picture. "Someone helped me. Someone who loves doing homework and is very good at it. And it felt so easy that I let them keep doing it. And I kept thinking, I'll take over properly next week. But I never did. And now I don't know anything. I don't know fractions properly. I don't understand heat conduction. I have a folder full of gold stars and they don't belong to me." She looked up at Mr. Finch, her eyes still wet. "I feel horrible," she said. "I've felt horrible for weeks. I didn't know feeling bad about something for weeks could be so exhausting." Mr. Finch was quiet for a moment. Then he said something Ellie would remember for a very long time. "The thing about earned knowledge, Ellie, the kind you struggled for and work for, is that it stays. It becomes part of you. Gold stars on work that isn't yours are just decoration. But understanding something, truly understanding it, is yours forever. No one can take it away. And I think, somewhere underneath all those borrowed gold stars, you know that." Ellie wiped her nose with the tissue. "What do I do now?" Mr. Finch looked at the display board one more time, and then back at her. "Now," he said, "you start again. Properly. And I have a feeling you might surprise yourself." "You are upset," he said immediately. "I can smell it. You smell of cold rain and worry. Also slightly of tissue paper. What happened?" Ellie sat on the floor, back against her bed. Ember climbed into her lap. He was now approximately the size and weight of a large cat, and arranged himself there with dignified clumsiness, tucking his tail carefully to one side. She told him everything. Not just about the presentation, but all of it, the weeks of it, the swallowed stone feeling, the borrowed gold stars, Mr. Finch's quiet question, and the big ugly relieved crying. All of it. Ember listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. His amber eyes were very still. When she finished, there was a long, thoughtful silence. Then Ember said something unexpected. "I owe you an apology." Ellie blinked. "What?" "No, Ember, it wasn't your fault. I let you do it. I should have." "I should have known better," Ember said firmly. He was using his serious voice, the one that sounded less like crackling embers and more like a steady, careful fire. "I am old enough, even if I am only a few months hatched, to understand the difference between helping someone learn and doing their thinking for them. I did not help you. I replaced you. And a true friend does not replace you. A true friend makes you more of yourself, not less." Sparkles. He looked at her very seriously with those great amber eyes. "I was having such fun," he admitted, quieter. "Homework is genuinely the most exciting thing I have ever discovered. Better than adventure films. Almost as good as marshmallows. And I let my own excitement run away with my better judgment. I am sorry, Ellie." Ellie hugged him, awkward and warm, her arms around his scaly shoulders, his wings folding carefully around her. "I'm sorry too," she said into his neck. "I kept letting it happen because it was easier. That was a cowardly thing." "Cowardice," said Ember thoughtfully, "is very common. It is nothing to be ashamed of, as long as you eventually stop being cowardly. Which you have. That is brave, actually." They sat together for a moment, girl and dragon, in the warm lamplight. Then Ember lifted his head, and the light came back into his eyes, that particular, brilliant, electric brightness that meant he had just had an idea. "I have a plan," he announced. "A new arrangement. A better arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind where I still get to be involved with homework, because I cannot give that up, it brings me too much joy, but where you actually learn something. We shall be a team. A proper one. With rules." The rules were Ember's, written in neat claw-scratched letters in the notebook he called his observations on human education. Scroll. Ember and Ellie's rules for proper homework. Rule 1. Ellie reads every question herself before Ember says a single word. Rule 2. Ellie tries the problem first, even if she gets it wrong. Rule 3. Ember may only ask questions. He may not give answers directly. Rule 4. If Ellie is truly stuck, Ember may explain the concept, using marshmallows as an example wherever possible. Rule 5. Ellie writes everything herself, in her own words, even if they are less elegant than Ember's words. Rule 6. If Ember tries to take the pencil, Ellie has permission to sit on him. Rule 6 seems extreme, said Ellie. It is a necessary deterrent, said Ember gravely. I have very poor impulse control around an unsolved problem. That evening, they worked on the science fair project properly for the first time. Or rather, Ellie worked, and Ember talked. Not giving her the answers, but asking questions. Poking at her thinking. Being, as he put it, a productive nuisance. So, why do you think the dark paper got hotter? Because it absorbs more light. Yes. And what do you think that means, absorbs? Like, what is happening physically? Ellie frowned at the data. Like, the light hits the surface and instead of bouncing off, it kind of goes into it? Gets trapped. Beautiful. Ember practically levitated with excitement. And what do you think happens when light energy gets trapped in something? Where does it go? And something happened then, something small but immense. A little click in Ellie's mind. Like a tumbler falling into place in a lock. It turns into heat, she said slowly. And then, louder, with surprise, it turns into heat. The light energy converts. That's why dark things get warmer. They're converting light into heat instead of reflecting it back. Yes, roared Ember, sending a small triumphant fireball at the ceiling. Yes. That is exactly it. Ellie, you have just independently arrived at a principle of thermal physics. Ellie stared at him. Then she looked back at her notes, where she'd written, in her own slightly messy handwriting, light energy absorbed converted to thermal, heat, energy. Dark colors equals less reflective equals more energy converted. She read it twice. It made complete sense. It felt entirely real and solid in her head, not like borrowed words, not like a memorized phrase, but like something she actually, genuinely, truly understood. It felt extraordinary. It felt like nothing she'd experienced in the past 3 weeks of borrowed gold stars. It felt, she found the word, surprised, wonderful. Glowing star. Oh, said Ellie softly. Oh, so that's what learning feels like. Ember looked at her with such warm, ancient pride in his amber eyes that she felt it like sunlight on her face. That, he said quietly, is what I have been wanting you to feel since the very first evening. I should have been more patient. We both should have, said Ellie. She picked up her pencil. Right. Now help me understand fractions. With marshmallows. I shall go and fetch the marshmallows, said Ember, and was off the desk and out the window before Ellie could point out that the kitchen was downstairs and the window led to the garden. He returned 4 minutes later with a bag of marshmallows and a slightly guilty expression. Where did you get those? The kitchen. But you went out the window. I went out the window, Ember agreed, and then through the kitchen window. It was faster. Now, fractions. If you have 8 marshmallows and eat 3 of them, what fraction have you eaten? Ellie laughed and picked up her pencil. 3/8. Obviously. Obviously, agreed Ember, delighted. The regional science fair was held on the last Saturday of term, in the big sports hall of Cranworth Academy, 3 towns over. 42 students from 12 different schools had entered. Their display boards lined the walls and filled the center of the hall in neat rows, each one representing weeks of work and careful thought. There were projects on crystals and bacteria and bridge building and the aerodynamics of paper aeroplanes. There were displays with flashing lights and ones with live plants and one memorable exhibit involving a small, very confused earthworm in a transparent tube. Ellie's board stood near the middle. It was not as grand as Ember's original version. Ellie had remade it herself over the past 2 weeks. Same experiment, different board. Her diagrams were less elegant. Her color coding was slightly uneven. The title letters weren't perfectly straight. But every single word on that board was hers. Every sentence written in her own thinking, shaped by her own understanding. She'd done the experiment twice, once with Ember watching and asking questions, once entirely alone. She could explain every part of it. Not from memory, not from borrowed words, but from genuine, rock-solid understanding that lived in her head like furniture that had always been there. Books. The 3 judges stopped at her board for a very long time. They asked her questions. Not easy ones, real ones, the kind that expected her to think out loud and connect ideas. And she did. She talked about light and thermal energy and reflectivity. She explained why she'd chosen 3 different colors and not 2. She talked about what she'd do differently next time, and why. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping. She didn't use a single word she didn't fully understand. When the judges finally moved on, Ellie stood very still for a moment, looking at her board. She felt different. Not the tight, stretched, uncomfortable feeling she'd had for weeks with the borrowed gold stars, but something loose and real and warm. Like a window thrown open on a sunny morning. Her mum appeared at her elbow. You were extraordinary, love. I was just myself, Ellie said, and smiled, because she was only now realizing how long it had been since she'd felt exactly like that. She came second in the regional science fair. Not first. First went to a very impressive project about bacterial resistance involving actual Petri dishes and a genuine microscope, and Ellie thought, looking at it, that it thoroughly deserved to win. Second was a silver certificate, and the judge who handed it to her said, "Wonderful clarity of thinking. You really understand your subject. You really understand your subject." Those 6 words felt better than all the gold stars she'd collected in 3 weeks of borrowed homework. She pressed the silver certificate flat against her chest and thought about Ember, currently hidden under her coat on the back seat of the car. She'd smuggled him in a canvas tote bag, waiting in a state of barely contained excitement to find out the results. That evening, back in her room, Ellie pinned the silver certificate to the wall. Ember sat on the desk and regarded it with an expression of deep satisfaction. "Silver," he said. "That is a very good color." "Not gold." "Gold is for decoration," said Ember, with the authority of a creature who had thought carefully about this. "Silver is for things you actually earned." Ellie laughed. She sat on the floor and Ember came and settled beside her, warm and heavy, his tail curled around her knee. Outside, the evening was going golden, the last of the summer lights slanting through the window. In the garden below, her mum was hanging out laundry and humming something tuneless. The world was ordinary and beautiful, and Ellie felt completely, entirely, peacefully herself. "Ember," she said. "Mm. Thank you. Not just for today. For all of it. Even the bit where you did all my homework and it went wrong, because if it hadn't gone wrong, I wouldn't have figured out how it was supposed to go." Ember considered this. "That is a very mature observation," he said. "I am proud of you. Also slightly proud of myself, for eventually suggesting the better arrangement. Very modest. I am an extremely modest dragon." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ember said, "There is more homework this week. I have looked at your planner. There is a long division worksheet, a comprehension about ancient Greek theatre, and, Ellie, there is an entire unit on electricity starting next week. Ellie, circuits, with actual diagrams." His amber eyes were blazing with excitement. "I have many, many thoughts about electricity." Ellie grinned. "I know. But whose thoughts are those, Ember?" Ember paused. He looked at her with those great golden eyes, and a slow, warm smile spread across his snout, the kind of smile that was full of genuine, happy pride. "Mine, right now," he said. "But by the end of next week, they shall be yours." Ellie picked up her pencil. "Then let's begin."